fabulous job pulling the pieces together. So thank you, Dominique. Good job. And Local First and ASU Center for Real Estate Theory and Practice have a special partnership where we put on a series of discussions about community and community development. And this is one of those, but this is we believe, a very critical one. And happy that we have been able to pull together several people who I think are the appropriate and excellent voices about this subject matter. I'd like to very briefly introduce our panel members, and they can elaborate on their own background if they wish. I'm going to keep it very short, but I'm going to begin with Wanda Dalla Costa, who is a faculty member. She's an ASU Institute professor at Herberger Institute for Design and the Arts. She's a senior sustainability scientist at GEOS. And there's a long list of other things that go underneath her name that represent her qualifications. But probably equally, if not more important, is Wanda is an architect. She is a woman, and she is a Native woman. So I think an important voice in this discussion. Next, we have Steve Jordan, who is the Director of Human Resources for the Ryan Companies. And Steve has been charged with trying to define diversity and establish diversity for the Ryan Companies. Next, we have Lorenzo Perez, who many of you already know. He's a local architect. He is of Hispanic background. And he is a developer of community embedded projects and a true community builder. Also joining us is Malik Goodwin, who is an architect. He is part of a company called the GWJ Group LLC out of Detroit. And previously, he was with the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation. And our moderator this evening is George Jackson, who is also with GWJ Group LLC and formerly the president of Detroit Economic Growth Corporation. George has a residence here as well as Detroit, whereas Malik lives in Detroit full time. And when this panel was being discussed, I thought about who would be the appropriate person to moderate this panel. And I thought of George, who I've known now for 12 years, 10 years, somewhere in there. And he is somebody who has plowed these fields that we're going to talk about, but has also done excellent community development work in the city of Detroit and other places. And I think no one better to help lead this discussion than George. And I'd also like to welcome Gary Nelson from NOMA, the National Organization of Minority Architects. When we were beginning this conversation, we reached out to Gary as well. And Gary, I don't know if you want to say a few words about NOMA and about this subject matter.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Kimber and Dominic and everyone, and good evening, everyone. It's nice to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. I will talk about the organization I'm with, and I'll talk briefly about myself and a little bit of some other comments. I'm the immediate past president of NOMA, Arizona. And for those who are not familiar with it, NOMA stands for the National Organization of Minority Architects, which was founded back in 1971 by 12 African-American architects when they attended the Detroit American Institute of Architects Conference. Quite frankly, they felt excluded. They were not welcomed by the organization. And not only that, the organization would not address the issues and concerns that they had, which was one, and this is 1971, the lack of diversity in the design profession, the lack of opportunities in the design profession, and community, giving back to the community service. Those are just not some of the priorities of the AIA. So they founded NOMA. And although it says minority architects, it is completely multicultural. It is open to everyone and anyone. So 3 years ago, we started a chapter here in Arizona, myself and 16 other founding members, based on the same premise. We're 100% welcoming, 100% inclusive organization, community-based. We want to get back to the community. We want to help college students that are their first gen. We want to be the support for them. We want to go to K-12 so they can reach out and so kids can see architects, engineers, contractors, real estate developers who look like them, who speak their language. You would be surprised how kids have looked up and said things to myself and other colleagues that I didn't know there were Black architects. Or as a woman, I didn't know I could be an engineer. These are some of the things that the youth have been led to believe. And we are here to combat that and make a change in that. And we're also here for each other through fellowship and camaraderie, which leads us to one of the reasons why we're having these conversations, which are really overdue, quite frankly. About myself, I am a very proud second generation Caribbean American. It used to be formerly called West Indian American, from islands of St. Croix, St. Bart's, St. Kitts, and St. Thomas. And I understand my Caribbean compadre Jeffrey over there, the minute I just started speaking, I started thinking back to my days of growing up in Long Island with my family and family get-togethers and hearing that wonderful, beautiful accent. One of the things I want to bring up is that that's who I am. What I do is I'm an architect, over 20 years, over 30 years experience, registered in 20 states. I've done all types of projects from large stadiums to municipal courthouses to fences around my kids' school. I say all that because one of the things about the challenges has been lately is the realization, and this has been over the course of my career, the architecture, engineering, construction, and real estate development community and industry has been in a bubble. It's been operating in a bubble. The world has changed and things have happened. I think we collectively spend so much time on the built environment that we do not address things that really affect the built environment. Everything affects the built environment, but we just never addressed it, never talked about it. So as an African-American, working inside a bubble, when outside a bubble, I'm facing things that are challenges because of the color of my skin. I was stopped when I was 12 and 17 years old by an officer for just riding my bike. One of those times I was going to high school, just riding my parents' driving car. Both times a police officer had the gun in a holster and I thought I was going to die. And I had that conversation, which is called the talk that many African-American parents have with their children. Some of you might have heard of these, some of you may not have, but these are things that I think is really important that you become aware of. Yes, some things might be uncomfortable that you hear, but put yourself in the shoes of those who experienced it, not necessarily how you're reacting to it, because it's never meant to be talking about anybody here personally. And I want to make that really clear. In all these conversations, no one is identifying anyone here personally. And the phrase, and I've heard this phrase before, I don't see color, and so it's not me. And that might be true, but I would challenge you with that statement saying, why don't you see me as Black? I'm very proud of it. I've been told Black is beautiful from when I was a kid. It's when people will get judged because of their Black, or because they're Latino, or because they're Asian, or because of indigenous background. That's the issue. Please see me as Black. I'm very proud of it. So I have no problems with that. But what we're saying is start seeing people for who they are, not their religion and sexual orientation and things of that nature. That is what we're combating. That is when we started this call to action to reach out to as many organizations as possible in an industry to talk, to have these conversations that really way overdue. And this is not about quotas. This is not about affirmative action. This is not about any of that. It simply comes down to being treated equally and wanting to be treated equally and have the opportunities that everyone else has. That's what this is really about. But in order for us to get to that point, there have been things that have been implicit biases over the course of generations that need to now be addressed. And that's why we came up with the 10-point plan. And we presented to Kimber and Mark and many organizations. Almost 30 organizations in the Valley have been presented this plan, which is actual points of really just addressing issues anywhere from how to deal with no tolerance of a client or consultant to not even using the word politically correct when many times it's considered insulting. Or just simply asking somebody, asking your colleagues who are a different race or a different religion, asking them for their experiences. You'll be surprised some of the things you hear, and ask them to be honest with you. And that's what I'm going to ask tonight is, you know, some of these members on this panel, I've had these conversations with, and I hope that they also share with you some of their experiences, because we all share different types of experience. But I think one other thing I speak on behalf of our chapter, collectively, we want to be treated as equals. Really, that is the bottom line. Dignity and respect in order for us to do the things that we're committed to in our professions and in our lives. Again, thanks appreciate the time, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Gary, very much. And we are happy to send your 10-point plan, all of those that are on the call tonight, to continue to spread that. Kimber, you want to say a few words, and then I've got a question for George and the panel to kick things off.
Thank you, Dominique, for sharing the NOMA link in the chat box. You should all know that you are able to become allies and supporters of NOMA if you're interested. So I just would like to share with everyone the evolution of Local First Arizona and where we are. My orientation as a middle-aged white woman when I started this organization was really local versus corporate. And my orientation was around the injustices that small local businesses of all kinds deal with every day. When the corporations come in, they get the sweetheart deals, they get the tax breaks, they get the incentives. I'm a small business owner that had a front row seat in the music industry battling all of the big corporations. And over time, my understanding of these issues has evolved tremendously. In about 2011, we started doing the hard work around race and having those conversations. And now our entire team at Local First Arizona has conversations around race regularly. Our leadership team is actually gone through extensive training, and we are in the process of becoming an anti-racist organization. And so these types of conversations are critically important. They are especially important, I think, in certain communities that tend to lean conservative, in communities that tend to be more white, dominant white, and they're more important in communities, in professions like the one we're having tonight, that are definitely dominant white and dominant male, and we need to be getting our colleagues, friends, employees, and others comfortable having a conversation around race. We can't possibly begin to grapple with white supremacy if we're uncomfortable simply having an open conversation about race, the history of the nation, how we got here, and the important steps we're going to need to take in order to create a more equitable society. So we're doing a lot of work at Local First. We have a lot of work to do still, but I encourage my colleagues to take those steps. I'd be happy to make recommendations on readings, on thoughts, on certainly facilitators. We've worked our way through a number of facilitators here in town with race-based trainings, and could find something that works for you. And then finally, I would just encourage an open dialogue here. We have a smaller group with us tonight, approximately 28 people. And this is the perfect time to ask the hard questions and to really come away tonight with some ideas about how each one of us can begin to enact new ways of thinking in the workplace, because that's really where it's going to start. So thank you all for being here tonight. And Mark, I'll hand it back to you to kick us off here.
Thank you. So I'm going to share something with everybody, which was quite remarkable to me in a negative way. we sent out the flyer about this event, and on the voicemail at school, received a voicemail from somebody whose name I'm not going to use, and I will paraphrase, but it was essentially this: I got your brochure. Or flyer. I don't know why we're having this conversation. This business is not going to change. It's been like this forever. I don't know that there's a problem, and I don't know why you're spending the time to have this conversation. And I listened to that voicemail, and I was like, wow, okay, therein lies the problem, that ignorant mentality is just so pervasive. And George, I'm going to throw this to you with the question, like, why are we having this conversation? Why do we need to continue to have this dialogue?
Well, I'm one of the seniors on this call. I'm 68 in December, and we're having this conversation because the problem has not been addressed. We have not seen results that make it go away, and it will not go away if we ignore that fact. When people say, "Hey, I'm tired of this," or "Why are we having a conversation?" Basically, that's just denial. And I'm just going to say this as a person who has been in both the corporate world as well as the quasi-public world. In the private sector, I was involved in 2 class action lawsuits in the 70s, and then we had to sue the same company in the 90s. you know. And one case went to the United States Supreme Court. And all I'm saying is just that, if I talk to my parents and my grandparents, they basically may use different vernacular and different examples, but problem still remains. And as long as it remains, we need to continue talking about it. But also, I'm a doer in regards to how you end up in 2 class action lawsuits that we won, both of them, by the way. I will say this: we have to also spend some time this evening about what are the next steps. If that is an issue in Arizona, then we should also spend more time addressing the issues than just talking about them. So that's my response to your question. If anyone else have any questions for me, this is a good time to do it. Of course, you can do it all night. Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to turn this over to you, George, and I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to listen, because I think it's incumbent upon us to now listen to what all of you have to say. So the show is yours, my friend.
One thing I find encouraging is that in this whole spectrum in terms of development, we have people from various disciplines with a variety of experiences. So the questions that we will be posing today, I definitely want to make sure that all of our panelists have an opportunity to respond and do it from your unique perspective, because we all learn from that. We're going to find that a lot of things that we see are similar, but they're all may also will come from a different perspective. Malik and I have worked together since 2002. Malik is an architect, I am not. So I have similar experiences, but I'll bring different ones to the table as well. Very unique ones to me, as Malik does. So I think that I'm looking forward to having that array and diversity in terms of perceptions about this issue, and bringing that, because I think we all learn from those. And I think that we will take those as far as they go in an open discussion, and then end up with questions and answers, period, for the people in the audience, so to speak. So I'd like to start with one prompt that I have here, and that is, what is it that we're seeing in this environment that we're talking about? What has your experience been? And I would like any panelists, I won't call anybody in order, but I will give each the opportunity to tell us how they respond to that question from their unique experiences.
Sure, I don't mind. Can you hear me? I don't mind jumping in.
Please do.
Well, you know what's interesting to me, because I teach at the architecture school, like we all know, there's an abundance of male role models. But I think right now what I'm seeing, which is really surprising to me, I teach all varied classes about diversity, about plurality, about indigeneity, indigenous studies. And my classes fill up I heard at the design school in 3 minutes. All the spots are gone. It's an optional course. And it makes me think that there is a transformation happening underway, that the generation that is with us, that are studying at the universities right now, are different. And when I recently went and read the stats, I think it was that by 2045, we're going to have a majority minority country in the US. And how are we transforming the way we teach, the way we practice, and our policies, pedagogy, policy, practice, how are those transforming to meet the needs of our diverse students? So I think this is what I'm seeing. My response, and I think what is really beautiful about architecture, is that it creates this wonderful opportunity to shift this issue of race and culture in a positive light. I tell you, many years I had my fist pumping, raised my hand in the air, fighting for the people, my indigenous people, standing up for them. But then I realized, wait, that's really exhausting. It just drains all your energy. And if I present this really beautiful thing that connects to so many aspects of culture, and I present that, I don't have to fight anymore. And people start to understand through these objects what the value systems are, what's important, what the aspirations of our communities are, rural and urban. And I think it has this beautiful ability to transform through a very positive messaging. That's what design does. And I think this is a powerful time.
Really?
I'll step in a little bit here. When you talk about what are we seeing, let me phrase it a little bit in terms of a couple things. One is, and this also speaks to, why are we having the conversation and why is this important? So there is a business case for diversity, frankly, and some of you have maybe heard it, but there are studies out there. Harvard Business Review has published several of them. McKinsey and Company has done studies and published them, even most recently in a publication that they came out with in May this year. And in the study, what it does is it pretty much substantiates the fact that companies that are more diverse are going to be more productive, more innovative, and more profitable. And they literally tie this to dollars. There are others that talk about, there are other metrics in there that talk about the fact that, frankly, if you have a board of directors that is diverse, if there's a woman on the board of directors, it makes you more productive, more profitable, that type of thing. And they put these stats to it, from 20 to 35% improvement in terms of, again, profitability and et cetera. So if you look at that, because some people say, hey, as Mark had mentioned, there are people out there that would say, hey, this industry is doing well. Phoenix is, when it's hot, it's hot. I mean, in terms of real estate and our business, that means architects are busy, contractors are busy, everyone's rolling. And so what's the problem? Well, again, the problem is that you could be doing even better. And also as to what Wanda just mentioned in terms of by 2045, that demographic is going to change. And in some places like Arizona, where we already are even more progressed towards that inflection point, we may get there even sooner. So now, how are you going to deal with it? One of the things that we see, at least in our industry, in the construction side, and we're a developer as well, is that we're having labor shortage, particularly when you had the SB 1070. I mean, we had a lot of Hispanics that basically left the state, and it created a major labor issue for us. Now we're trying to continue to replenish that pipeline. So again, diversity really is important from a lot of reasons, not only not even from just the business case, although that's imperative, but also, again, personnel, pipeline, things of that nature. And then you have to figure out, how do we make sure that we can put ourselves in a position to have that pipeline that's going to create a lot of the diversity that people will need in order to get to the labor force. And you can even break it down into further positions of, if you go by ethnicities even, there are certain ethnicities that aren't producing more kids, so that, there's going to be less labor, when you look at it that way, that are going to be, and the higher end, let me say the more quantity of labor is going to come from people of color. So now how do you deal with that? So again, I just put that out there in terms of what do you see and where you at. That's what we're seeing in the industry. And again, even from a development standpoint, it is male dominated. It is Caucasian male dominated from different aspects of it, whether it be the real estate broker side or the actual developer side, even the finance side, all completely Caucasian male dominated. And again, that's okay, but at some point there are going to be some challenges with that. And then you also look at, and Ryan, we've been on top of it and working towards it. Everybody's always in some form of their journey, but we see ourselves also working. We're mostly private developers, but we also do some things for government. And with government, we've had situations where they're saying, "Hey, we need to see some diversity in your group." So we're seeing clients, not just government. Also, we do work for the Amazons of the world and others. And this concept of corporate social responsibility is pushing people to ask for more diversity, and they want to see from their vendors or their people that they do business with that you're being compliant in that regard as well.
Thank you. I'd like to hear from either Mr. Perez or Mr. Malik Gupta.
Steve touched on a lot of the points that I had on my list, and I think that I'd just like to amplify the point that he raised about the pipeline and the importance of that. I think that I think Gary spoke to the fact that you can run into a young person and they might not have the slightest idea of all of the people and the trades and skill sets that are necessary to transform the built environment. So, the pipeline really starts at that level, and continues on through schooling into your professional schooling, and making sure that those transitions from professional schooling to the industry is really important. And then even once you're in the industry, making sure that there's some intentionality within those organizations to make sure that people have, at a minimum, have the opportunity to move up further within those companies and those entities. So based on what I'm seeing, I really think the pipeline piece is really important.
Mr. Perez?
Yeah, George, thank you. I'll just build on what Malik's saying. And from just my personal experience and observations is just flat out underrepresentation. I mean, top to bottom in the entire industry. And I think part of it is, from my own experience, I share a story. In my family and circle of relationships, the only connection we had to real estate and development from a professional standpoint were family members that either constructed it or cleaned and maintained it. And a small subset that actually took the leap or took the time to go through the process of owning their own home or whatever. But quite often, there's just a wide strata, and we can get into why that is when we talk about redlining and systemic racism over the years, where people just didn't have the exposure or opportunity. But I would say that we're just not seeing that the youth in our communities of color are seeing that it's even a possibility of a career path, or have been exposed to the broader, the finance, the design, especially the ownership from the investment side of it. So I think there's a lot of work and opportunity to focus on that as early as possible, and just creating awareness of the opportunities, and then creating systems to channel and support the individuals into the pipeline, and really just selling the notion of possibility, and teaching them to be more aware of the built environment around them and the opportunities that they might afford to build a quality of life, an asset base, or a career. And anyways, that's what I see and have experienced.
Okay. The next prompt or question I will ask, and Mr. Gordon touched upon this, is how would the built environment look differently if designed by a more diverse group of professionals? What impact would more diversity have on the environment professionally in regards to the design, and how that would be different with more diversity? And I said it twice for a reason. I'll get back to that. Wanda, would you be so kind?
Sure. So let me offer an example. So we were working on a project. It was right across from the Parliament. It was a huge project, and we had an elder on our team. And she asked us, when we were creating this big building for people who wear suits in downtown Ottawa, it's the capital in Canada. And she said, what about the people that aren't in suits? And we sort of all, took a moment to think about it. The building ended up in the end having a soup kitchen inside. That was the program that she influenced. And to me, what that speaks to is this notion of, I guess, more holistic measures of wellness, or holistic measures of assessing buildings. And it got me thinking that, it was one of those projects that just sets you on another pathway, and you start to think, wait, there was something really profound that happened here. And then I've recently done a bit of research, and the Maori people in Auckland, New Zealand, the indigenous people there, actually brought a values-based system to urban design. So it's called the Te Aranga Māori Urban Design Principles, and it is exactly that. It's based on a more holistic indicators of wellness. It's based on a value system of the local people. And everyone is now accessing it and using it. And so I think for me, this is what gets me really excited about this, is that can we have, I've often had a complaint with architecture school that it was 100% based on aesthetics. If you appeal to the right professor in architecture school with the style that he loves, you're going to get great grades, you're going to get a job right after school. But if you come from a world, I came from a bit of a different world. I'd backpacked and traveled and saw very different architectures, and they weren't the norm. They weren't the architecture of the day. And it took me a while to figure out that I had to transform to what my professors wanted me to produce. Not from what I believed, not from what the value systems that I came from, not from what I had seen, 7 years backpacking, but what I knew they wanted so I could get my A. And I think for me, I think we need to really create that period of self-definition in architecture where communities, all the different communities, whether it's old, LGBTQ, Black, Indigenous, whatever community you come from, have a period of self-definition to kind of define what it is and how does it look different from the Mies van der Rohe, from the Louis Kahn. Why is it different?
Excellent. Steve, what about you?
So one of the things that, in terms of what would it look like and be different, I'll come again from the construction and development side. Is one of the things that seems like it's not even on the radar because you think more design wise. But one of the places I would go is you would see more sustainable buildings. In terms of, if you're familiar with Green Building Council, there's Green Globe and some others that are essentially agencies that where you can come up with more sustainable buildings, and they have a set of guidelines, whether it's a gold or platinum rated building based on the level of reusable materials or renewable materials, how you recycle on site, down to your energy usage, water usage, all of the above. And that was really primarily driven and forced, frankly, by the public sector. So the public sector really said, hey, whether it was schools, and even ASU now is trying to go net zero on most of their buildings, and in terms of energy, and so and to reduce the carbon footprint, all that. So this is just something that, like I said, it seems like it's not something that will come top of mind, but it's really important because at least even from a developer standpoint, again, development is driven by a pretty homogenous group of individuals. And again, it was developed and really forced by public. On the private side, in terms of offices, we at Ryan, we embrace green building, and so we tend to do that. However, for a lot of builders, they don't. And at the end of the day, when you sell a building, you really don't get any added value for it. On the capital markets, if you're looking at 2 suburban office buildings, 3 stories, 150,000 square feet, that's kind of bread and butter type of suburban office. If one is a lead, say, gold building and one is not, there's really not any appreciable difference in terms of what you're going to sell that building for. And therefore, most of that homogenous group of developers, financiers, constructors looked at it and said, why would I do that? But the reality is, it's just better for our environment to have more sustainable buildings. So that's just one off the cuff that I see, at least from our construction and development side.
Thank you very much, Malik. To get your perspective on that, answering that question.
So I think, my mind immediately goes to the aesthetic side, and that's probably not all that fair. But I think Wanda kind of touched a little bit on it in terms of possibly missed opportunities with, vernaculars in architecture that haven't really been tapped in terms of the ways in which spaces can be created in the ways that people can experience those spaces and those environments upon how it was designed. So I kind of go to what opportunity was missed by not having at least people with different perspectives in the conversation, number one, and then maybe number two would be not having equal weight put on the perspectives of those folks that are ethnically diverse, not having the same weight as others might have in the conversation. So I would basically say that.
So George, let me ask you a question. In this of the panel members, have you had experiences in your own personal and professional life where you're sitting there going, everybody is totally missing this. I just view this differently, or I think that there's a bigger opportunity here from the perspective of inclusiveness and the creation of places or the creation of opportunities, frankly, as it relates to inclusiveness. So in your own individual, professional, and personal lives, have you run across those situations?
Yeah.
Mark, go ahead.
I was just going to offer something that I learned last year. I was working in a neighborhood with some students. It's a 67% Latinx zip code. I'm not Latinx, so I had a lot of learning to do. But they explained to me that one of the kids was embarrassed about something called a yarda, which is basically when they have these, their life spills out into their front yard in Latinx neighborhoods. And I told her, this is the most beautiful concept I heard, because do you remember Jane Jacobs, who's like the big theorist of the cities, Eyes on the Street? This is exactly what this concept did. And it just blew my mind that she was actually embarrassed and was telling me that for her, it was an embarrassment growing up. And I said, no, this is what they've been proposing since, the 50s, but look at it. This is the actualization of it. And we're not recognizing those vernaculars, to Malik's point, those vernacular tendencies. And I think that was a moment for me where I said, whoa, I just got it, right? So I'm coming into a different culture, and it was just like, I just got something that I had never, it was a gift that day. It was really a gift.
I'm going to say something. I've had this experience happen to me a lot, and early in my career, and even later. It got about less later. Where you going back to what Mark said, you kind of you say, boy, they're not getting it. I realized after a while they just didn't want to get it, because it was more important who said it than what was being said. Okay, and I'm gonna give you an example of a company that found that out and was successful after they acknowledged that. And that was most of the big three in Detroit. Remember Cadillac was about the Cadillac design into a rapid new design, because it was a dying breed, it was a dinosaur. That was an African American, became the designer of the car. They finally gave him the job, And we've seen that a lot, in terms of trying to break a culture. And believe me, GM has a culture. You could tell how, and I've learned that in corporate America, you could tell who's going to get promotion and rise to the top just by how they look. And the thing about it is that we have to really think about overcoming that mindset. And that mindset, and that I prefer people who look like me, and that's more important than bottom line results. It's more important than the bottom line, and I think we suffered even on the world stage in terms of competition because of it. A lot more companies are being more sensitive to that than they've ever been. But we have seen that at Ford, GM, and Chrysler, and you find that some of their most dramatic, best-selling models now are because there's more diversity in regards to the designers in the big three. They basically are not it's not all old vanilla anymore. And once they opened up, it happened, and it helped their sales to a point that Steve brought up earlier. So again, I think that changing culture and changing that mindset of the good old boy club, is something. That's why I said you have to address it one way or another.
George,
I'd like to add, if it's okay, I'd like to add something to this conversation, and it goes to what Mark was asking, and it goes something along the lines of Wanda just gave us an example of the Latino community, Latinx community. I'll give an example in the African American community in terms of designing based on culture, and it is a phrase called stooping. And anyone who's been in the African American community might be aware of that phrase. And for those who may not be familiar with it, it is basically the concrete steps, the brick steps that lead up to your house. And some of you might be of the age of the Hey Arnold 1990s Nickelodeon era, when I watched with my kids, you saw an article, there's an actual cartoon about it. And stooping is basically where, in my neighborhood, growing up in New York and Long Island, in African-American neighborhoods all around the country, the whole purpose of the stoop is basically where parents would sit outside and talk to other parents watching their kids play, or their kids would sit on the stoop and talk to their other friends. When they were punished, they couldn't go beyond the stoop. they could sit on the stoop. But it was an example of how a community watched each other, were there for each other. If I was down the street and I broke a glass window or something like that, by the time I got home, my parents already knew, because that conversation went from one house to the next house to the next house to the next house. That was a sense of community. That was taken away in a lot of African American communities where, quite frankly, designers were not aware of it or didn't care about it, didn't ask, started building high rises and started building buildings where the stoops didn't exist anymore. And so that disconnection occurred. And we brought down to a lot of things which we have in terms of neighborhoods when kids are not being watched by their parents. Many of us grew up, the infamous question was, during the summertime, what time did you go home? And that's the time when the lights went on.
Mhm.
And that's something that, again, no matter what part of the country, but if you were removed from that, and your parents are removed from that, and they don't know the lights coming on or whatever, and they're on the 25th floor or whatever, that disconnect happens. And that you can see the direct result of a person who's not familiar with a culture and how it affects and basically how it affects and degrades and denigrates a community by not designing based on the culture which brought the community together.
Yeah. So George, you and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and we won't use the name of your client, but you had a client you basically fired because
Yes.
you were trying to change the culture. You were asked to help them to find ways to change the culture. And at the end, you just said, that's not going to happen. So, maybe you can share that a little bit because it's very current. And much like the voicemail that I got, I'm shocked by it. But, changing culture is really hard because everything you learn in business school begins with establishing a culture for an organization. So I'm going to ask you that if you can recount that a little bit.
Yeah, it's pretty recent actually, and I must say it's good to get to the point in life where you can fire your client instead of them firing you. But I must say that in this case, when they hired us, and Malik was worked with me, he has worked with me on this in this particular situation. They knew that who they were getting when they hired us. That we would be straight shooters, and we will speak to power. I'm known to do that. But we also told them when they told us to do an assessment of one of their targeted communities that they were supposed to be helping in terms of community and economic development. When they mentioned that, they asked us, come back before we hired us. Tell us what you think. Give us our observation. And I let them know in no uncertain terms that I thought that one of the problems why change is not taking place in this community from a community and economic development standpoint was them. They were the problem. They would fund things that never met their objectives. They seemed to fund a lot of organizations who had never met their objectives. And they hired us anyway after we told them that they were part of the problem. Well, we started addressing the issues and whatnot. And we found, I got to the point where I realized that the people there cared more about themselves and were internally focused and really didn't give a damn about the people in that community. And at that point, that's where we had to address the issue of maybe your values also are not not linked to our values in regards to we came here to bring about change, and we actually did that and ran into problems when we did bring change that was positive from the very people who were funding us. And when it gets to that point, that's when we decided that we had to make a move. And that's not the first time that has happened, but it does happen. And so, if you're in the business of change and making things better for people, I think that should be your goal, not just feeding into your and being internally focused. And that's what I saw in the culture there.
So Steve, can I ask you, because George brings up changing the culture, it's hard. Ryan Companies is Irish, white, Midwestern, doesn't get any more white than Ryan Companies. How have you found the ability to change culture, and I don't know if change is necessarily the word, but have culture adapt and evolve?
Well, it's challenging, and again, it's just because you're dealing with people. I can give you there's a couple things from a standpoint that I was thinking about that. I apologize, I got a battery low notice.
No.
We'll pull that. We'll take care of that and get that in. There we go. And so a couple things. One is from a cultural standpoint in terms of people. In fact, one of the reasons why I even got involved in our HR group with a focus in diversity and inclusion is a conversation that I had with our CEO probably 5 years ago. And Pat Ryan, our then CEO, who's now chairman of the board, pulled me aside. He said, "Hey, Steve, I may need some help. We're just not doing well in terms of our diversity." I look around the office, and we're headquartered in Minneapolis, and he says, "Everybody looks like me. We're a bunch of old white guys." And we kind of chuckled about it. But the reality is that the good news was that he recognized that we're an 80-year-old company now. And so we needed to get some things done. And frankly, a couple of years went by and we weren't really doing as well as we needed to. And so we started being more intentional. And as you say, whether it's change or evolve, we look at it as what we call our journey. And interestingly, as I've done a little bit more research on it, it seems like construction companies, particularly larger companies, and we're kind of a mid-size, frankly, but a lot of them, for some reason, tended to start their diversity and inclusion journey right around 2015 to 17. That seems like, Turner, Mortensen, Gilbane, all these types of companies, and some of our developers as well. And so we've had to go through training. We've had to, and we've made the business case, and we've done a lot of things so that people can try to get their heads around, why do I need to change? And ultimately, it takes time. And then things get further complicated because, as you know, there's going to be attrition. So the people that you train, you were getting further in their journey, now are gone, and you replace them with new people and that type of thing. And you try to hire for people who maybe already have some cultural competence, things of that nature. But you have to be intentional about putting that in your hiring descriptions, job descriptions, people that maybe that's one of the criteria. You have cultural competence. So it's a journey, and it takes a while to get there. But one of the things I will say is that you do have to be intentional about your thoughts and where you're going with it. And so that's on the people side, and you're going to have pushback. One of the things that was interesting to me is in Minneapolis, that's where George Floyd, was murdered there. And so ultimately, in his situation, in our situation, because we're headquartered in Minneapolis, you had some protests that created some damage to the buildings downtown, some of which Ryan owns. And it was interesting to see how people from Minnesota, mostly Caucasian, would say, "Wow, I can't believe this is happening in Minnesota." And I would tell them, I said, "Well, I used to live in Minnesota. I lived there for 14 years. And it's frankly, the quote unquote Minnesota nice is not so nice if you're a person of color on frequent occasion." And then ultimately, when they said, I don't know, this just doesn't happen in Minnesota. I said, "Well, just so you know, there have been 4 murders like this in the last 5 years. Do you remember the name Philando Castile? He was a person of color, stopped by a cop, said, 'Hey, I have a gun in the car. I'm not going to use it. I just need to get my license out of my pocket.' He reaches down and the cop shoots him twice. He bleeds out in front of his girlfriend and his daughter in the back seat." That happened in Minneapolis. So one of my point of that simply is just saying, people oftentimes don't want to address and just realize sometimes the severity of where we are. And because we all kind of want to stay in our bubbles and, hey, life is good. Yeah, the economy's good. Things are going well. And don't want to have these difficult conversations. Don't want to talk about things like this. So that's why George Floyd's issue and incident was really most unfortunate. But it has created a movement that has been unprecedented in recent times. One of the other things that's coming out about it, and I will say this also in terms of our evolution in terms of culture, this has also really started to put the spotlight on corporate social responsibility. So now companies are not just wanting to do what they normally do. They're feeling some pressure to do some things differently. Even as a developer, Ryan companies, we started out saying in senior living, we've got a pretty good foothold in the senior living market. We started out doing what we call Section 42 senior housing, which is tax. There's some tax increment financing that goes along with it and some things of that nature. And so there are some advantages with that. But pretty quickly, then we moved into regular market rents on senior living. It was more profitable. And then now I'm proud to say, and I've told this to our corporate leadership, that even in some of the new developments that we're doing that are transformation, we've been fortunate to do some transformational type of projects, like in Minneapolis, or like you look at State Farm, that we did that development in Tempe, the 5 glass buildings for State Farm north of ASU's stadium. But we did that one. But there was a new project that we're doing in North Minneapolis, and you're always concerned as a developer, at least I am, about gentrification. And in this case, we probably did displace some people. There was also a lot of dilapidated, blighted buildings and that sort of thing. But in this new development, that's going to be pretty magnanimous. We are also putting in affordable housing. We're putting in, and we're using 2 developers who are people of color ownership that are going to provide that in our overall development. That'll have office, it'll have senior living, it'll have high-end apartments, that type of thing. And we're also even putting in one group that's going to have a shelter type of building. I don't want to call it that, but where abused women will be able to go as a transition housing. And that's going to be in this development that's a pretty high-end development. But again, a lot of that was spurred by some of the things that are going on. And as at Ryan companies, as we've started to have these, what we call pause, listen, and learn, difficult conversations about race, about ethnicity, about culture, and corporate responsibility, this is where our company is starting to go. And we're seeing a lot of other companies do it as well. Fortune 500 companies like General Mills, Target, those kind of companies, they're going in that same direction. So from a culture standpoint, people-wise, you have to deal with people. And while I'll leave you with this, is when George Floyd's incident first happened, I had so many Caucasian colleagues come up and say, what can we do? This is crazy. We have to do something. And here we are 4 months, 5 months later, and we also are getting pushback. We still have a lot of employees saying, this is great, what we're doing. I love to hear the conversations, and I'm learning so much. But we also have input from our colleagues that are saying, hey, this is a little too much. We're moving a little too fast. This seems political to me. And now we have to bring them along as well. So those are some of the things that happen as you deal with culture, both from a personnel standpoint and a business standpoint.
Culture is uncomfortable when it changes for people. There's absolutely no doubt about it. George and Malik, you both come from a city that, if asked the average person, Detroit is an African-American city. I mean, there's a lot of people of color there, right? But you have run into the same issues in your own city.
Yeah, there's no about it. Because the power, we have political power, we have population, but the real decision-making power in terms of the economics of the city are still very much there, as white as they are in any other city in America. And so the end result is that we have the same issues, even with the dynamics that we have that may suggest otherwise. But I really do think too that again, it gets back to it's very difficult for people in power to give up their privilege. It's very difficult. And they will hold on it by rationalizing it, by saying there's no problem exists. Why do we keep talking about this? But but the bottom line is that we still have the same issues, and we still have had to fight in those regards. I think the furthest we've come along, though, probably has been our police department, which did employ we haven't had many issues in regards to that. It's not that there's not people who are not unhappy, but I do think that one, we have a hell of a lot of Black, African American and Latino police officers. And two, we also have, we went to a community police, not because they wanted to, we were under a court order from the federal government to do so. I think the court order went over a decade. But we do see that working to some degree. They're not perfect, but I think that it's made some great strides by being more community oriented. And then also coming in with the police, a civilian police commission. But the city itself, I mean, we still have those same issues. And if you look at it, again, we have something Steve sort of touched on in regards to the waffling, is that some of the dynamics we see is that there seems to be a control of the type of Black person they will promote, and that also has nothing to do with performance sometimes. But it has more to do with compliance and basically going along to get along and just being happy with a seat at the table and just regurgitating whatever you're told to say. So we see it in many ways, and but at the same time, we do see some progress in some areas, but political power doesn't necessarily mean the game changes in regards to the private sector. And it does only, and going back to something Steve said in regards to the, trying to bring about change in terms of these companies. The companies that I see who have made the greatest strides are those who have enacted where there are financial element to bringing about hiring people of color. One thing people will always pay attention to is it was going to hurt them in the pocketbook. But just out the goodness of their heart, that doesn't work. We've been doing that for 100 years, more than that. But I just had noticed that some companies now have gone so far as to say, hey, look, that's one of the things you're going to be evaluated on in regards to your performance appraisal and also any raises you may or may not get. I've seen more changes in those companies than I have in ones who haven't done that.
So Mark, from a real estate development and standpoint, the economics that are put into practice in the metropolitan Detroit area are definitely different than the economics that you experience within the city proper. I would definitely say that the metropolitan Detroit area definitely operates similar to other metropolitan areas across the country. It's still very difficult to underwrite deals within the city of Detroit because you have an instant gap in your pro forma based upon the amount of cost to revenue that you expect from developing. And that's had an impact on those of us who are in the development realm, who are owners and who want to contribute and invest in the city of Detroit. We often have to go, we often have to find ways to fill those gaps in our pro formas in order for our deals to pencil. And so I think that's another struggle that is unique to Detroit, as opposed to trying to do deals outside of the city proper that I wanted to mention as well. And also, also want to touch on the marketing and branding aspect of these projects as well. You have to spend a lot of time with your partners to come up with a marketing strategy and a branding strategy that's really going to hit your target market. Because of the things that, people have their preconceived notions about Detroit, but they express a willingness to learn more about Detroit and figure out where the investment opportunities are. George and I have had to spend a lot of time with our partners, just making sure that, the story and the narrative that's associated with some of the projects that we're working on really speak to the target market. So I just wanted to make that point as well.
I think too, something that Mark was probably bringing up too is that even in the city with all those black folks and the turnaround that we helped oversee, sitting at the Economic Growth Corporation in Detroit, it's very difficult. We had a very difficult time getting seeing African American developers participate in that. And I mean, I still face challenges myself, and I was the president of the Economic Growth Corporation, because in terms of we still don't get into click. Fortunately, we are more fortunate than most, obviously, but we still lag behind in regards to development and participation in the so-called turnaround of the city of Detroit.
So George, let me jump in. Steve, a couple of weeks ago, we were on a call, and you said something which I think was poignant. We were talking about the fact that in order to drive the diversity that we know is so important and necessary, it needs to come from the top down many times. And when you look at the top and you look at how you get to the top and you look at who makes the decisions to hire people, there's not people of color. And so you go, okay, well, we need more people. We need more people of color and of ethnically diverse backgrounds to be the developers, to be the leaders. And you said it's very clubby, right? You have a foot in the door the day you're born into a white privileged family who's in the business, and you go to Brophy and you come out of Brophy and you've got the internships and you've got the connections and you easily roll into it. Lorenzo, did you go to Brophy? You're on mute, but.
No, funny as it may be, Mark, I got into Brophy and I didn't last more than a week because I didn't feel I belonged. That was mid 80s. Yeah. But I will say, I joke with a lot of my peers in the group because I went to Central right next door, and chuckle. A lot of those guys I was friends with in high school did land those internships and have done very well for themselves in commercial real estate. So I'll joke that, what is that, the Brophy boy track, you go there, U of A, fraternity, and then into commercial real estate. But there's a lot of truth to that. And I will say, having built a practice from scratch, I get a lot of people asking me how you do it. How did you do it? And because I grew up in a lower moderate income family in Central Phoenix, a Latino family, and nobody I knew was in that. And I was fortunate to have exposure and have an opportunity to work at Kitchell and meet a great business partner in John Kitchell. And that really is the only reason. Is the God honest truth. I was very lucky and blessed that I had that opportunity. And that's not available to a lot of people, and have that mentorship. That's where we need to try and create those opportunities for others.
I agree with Lorenzo about you need to have the mentorship to open the opportunities. I will give a little story. My son went to Brophy. Okay, so, and I'm saying that for a big reason, because everything's not paved with gold for people that come from Brophy, because he was stopped by police officers when he was in Brophy. And he was questioned. This is by an actual teacher at Brophy who thought he was a single parent, that he was only being raised by a single parent. Okay, so, and there were assumptions, a lot of assumptions like that occur. So no matter, you might have gone to a Brophy, you might have gone to an Ivy League school, but one of the challenges we have to look beyond is learning how to give everybody equal opportunities. I keep saying that because he did all the things he's supposed to do. He did all the things he's supposed to do. Daughter went to Duke and Harvard. She did all the things she's supposed to do, but yet they still question things because of their color of the skin. And part of the issue is going to be the challenge is to have these conversations with those who are influencers. I'm not sure how we can do this, but there's got to be a changing of the attitude and the approach and the presumptions that occur that prevent people from having these opportunities of internships and mentoring.
So isn't that a matter of changing the opportunity for those by making them available, by being purposeful about those opportunities for people from diverse backgrounds and other parts of the geographic area?
The opportunities are great. The issue comes back with implicit biases that occur to prevent those opportunities from being taken advantage of, for lack of a better term. So there might be opportunity, but I mentioned before when I talked to you and Kimber that I actually sat in interviews and in resume reviews where the people who were choosing who to hire threw away a resume because the surname was difficult to pronounce. Or if it was a construction administration position, that they would not look at a resume of a woman. So those go to there. You can have a lot of opportunities, but if you're not going to address the implicit biases that prevent people from having those opportunities, you can have all the opportunities you want. A company may want to be diverse, and I ask what school they go to interview, and for diversity, hopefully nobody on this is from University of Kansas, but I don't use University of Kansas as not a diverse architecture program. So you can have all these opportunities for internships, but it's going to take people and companies to learn and to come up with a strategy that's going to help them have the success that's needed.
Yeah, and also even amongst us, and to say this in regards to when you are in a position of influence, I've taken full advantage of that in regards to everything I've worked on, whether it was president of the Economic Growth Corporation, where we had the most diverse staff of any nonprofit in the state of Michigan, and we didn't have a program. We hired the best people, and it was amazing that we ended up being a diverse organization. Right now, we're engaged in a project, development project, 104,000 square foot building, adaptive reuse. We are Black developers working with some wonderful majority folks, 50-50, but we have an African-American contractor, construction manager. We have a woman as our architect of record. And so all the way down the line, we have included that diversity in what we do. And so that's something to keep in mind. And that's a positive story because there are some positive ones out here. And I want to point that out. But I think it's very important that we play a role in this. That doesn't mean not to pursue and make sure that the environment as a whole changes, but do everything that we could do to bring about those changes. And we have to walk the talk too.
So, Kimber, you had written a question in the chat, and this goes to your question to some degree. And I'm curious, this is truly a question for everybody. Do we know of a community that has an explicit stated diversity policy, or at least set of objectives and goals that is publicly known, that is publicly stated and is pointed to, and then used in order to help make decisions? Are there any communities like that? I'm going to take that as a no.
Probably, yeah.
I mean,
well, let me ask another.
I'm going to give you a quick story. It was on Horizons probably 3-4 years ago. It was after Ducey, Governor Ducey had been elected, and he wanted to redo the brand for the state of Arizona. And so I was on the show with the woman who was hired to do that, and I asked the question. I said, "Okay, so you want to change the brand? Are you talking about a new logo, a slogan, or you truly want to change the brand of the state of Arizona?" And she goes, "Well, we want a new brand." I said, "So if that's what you're talking about, a brand is a promise. And if you're going to make a promise, can you make sure that all of the policies of the state of Arizona back that promise up?" Well, we have no change in brand for the state of Arizona. And I think one of the things that you get when you make these statements, these policies in particular like that, can we establish, and Sharon walked away from GPAC, but, are we better served as a place by making an explicit statement that this is an objective, and it will run through the various parts of the community itself, so that we can build social capital, political capital, economic capital, financial capital for all elements of the community? Or is that purely a flipping pipe dream?
I would say that that's something that is possible. It's a long-term endeavor. And, I just look at it and say, again, you've got to get people on board. A lot of times, and particularly when it comes to diversity and inclusion, they talk about your head, your heart, and your hand, meaning your head. You have to understand it to the point that you say, hey, there's enough knowledge, there's enough business sense, if you will. Like I talked about, there's business cases out there that say that diversity is important. And we've talked about, the pipeline, we've talked about labor shortage, we've talked about things like that. So even if you can get your head around it from a knowledge standpoint, that's one aspect. The other part is your hands, and that's actually doing something about it. So once you have the knowledge, can you really get something done? And the heart is kind of in my opinion, one of the most important pieces of that equation, because it's people's heart that has to change. And again, that's where we talk about this concept of can you get beyond, your own fragility? Can you get beyond your own ego? Can you put yourself in a position that you can, you don't see it as him or me or her or me, in this economy that we're expanding into. And that's one of the things you see it, and some of it more of a microcosm in the corporate scenario, because I've had Caucasian colleagues, even millennials, come up and say, well, Steve, we seem to be going down this diversity and inclusion path. So I, as a young Caucasian, who's the most discriminated against? Me, the young Caucasian. It's like, really? Okay.
What's your reaction to that?
Well, I'll be very transparent here. My internal response is different than my external response. How about that? So, and then as I tell him, I've told him, I said, hey, look, you are necessary, because if you're not in this fabric, then guess what? Then we are being exclusive, and that's not the point. We want to be inclusive. And the whole point is that hopefully as we grow, as we expand, there are going to be new positions that are going to happen. There's going to be attrition. So, some people are going to leave. We're going to need new people to come in. And those are opportunities where we can, fulfill that pipeline or refill that pipeline with more diversity, because we didn't do it the first time. There are a lot of logistics that have to happen in order to make that happen, not just the training that's going to hopefully make people better about their biases. We all have biases. So we have to try to help them to manage and acknowledge they've got the biases. Now, let's manage your affinity bias towards, if you're a Brophy grad, you want to hire that Brophy grad 20 years later who went to the same fraternity you went to at U of A or ASU. That's fine, but how do you manage through that so that you give everybody equal footing as you try to make the decisions on hiring? So it's things like that. The other piece of it is also trying to get some traction and actually get people of color in the house or in the process, because otherwise what I try to help a lot of my colleagues realize, guess what? Every person of color doesn't want to be the next Jackie Robinson. In other words, they don't want to be that person that's in the house and one of only a few, and everybody looks at them like, hey, why do Black people do this? Why do Hispanic people do that? And like you're the authority for everybody in your group. And so that's not desirable as well. And what you're also, when you talk about one of the things you see, is that as students are becoming so much more aware, and as they come out of schools and look at companies that they want to go into to hire, they are asking questions about culture. What is your culture like? I want to see some people, and if they're people of color, like, let me, what do your people look like at senior levels? everything's online now. Everything's on the internet. So I've seen students, they go out and they look at the board of directors. If it's all Caucasian males across the board, they're not feeling as good about that company. So, like I said, there's just a lot of things to this whole thing about culture and trying to get diversity in the pipeline, because there's so many moving parts and pieces that have to all come together in order for it to happen. But the other thing I will also say this though is, again, you have to be intentional, and that's scary for a lot of people, because it almost harkens back to a phrase called quotas.
Yeah.
And that is disturbing to, frankly, the moral majority. People want to say, hey, that doesn't seem fair. Well, okay, has it been fair the last couple hundred years? Probably not. So now, if you want to really be intentional, you can make some moves. And that's one of the things I challenge our company with on occasion. Hey, we can continue to do what we've always done, but if we're expecting different results, shame on us, right?
Yep. Yep.
I also just wanted to say, Steve, there's a very real white supremacist culture that is preying particularly on young white males with that narrative that you just named, that is causing even more of a racial divide. And so I think all of us need to have a heightened awareness about that, and have the real dialogue with those folks, because they say that negative narrative over and over, and they convince themselves they're actually the victim. So thank you for elevating that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
To bring up the fact, I believe it was Gary who had mentioned that there was an attempt to participate in some of the associations and things of this nature. Where does that stand now? And how can you better work with organizations, be it architects, but everyone in this whole design world, in regards to trying to build some type of bridges to get some type of progress in terms of, and beyond talk, but actual action in regards to making them a lot more assertive. I won't say sensitive, that's not a strong enough term, but aggressively or assertively start addressing some of the issues, because they are the decision makers in most cases.
Well, I could just speak. What we did was we actually reached out to we had the list of the top 50 firms in the Valley, and we reached out to every single one of them and told them what we wanted to do. We wanted to talk about our action plan, and out of those 50, we were able to have a conversation with 30 of them. And so that was the start. And then we reached out to organizations like like Local First. We reached out to Kimber and Mark. We did that point of reaching out to as many organizations. We just decided it was going to be industry wide to solve the issue. And so that's why we reached out to ASU and to all these major organizations and national firms. And that's what we did. We just reached out. We had complete transparency and told them the reasons. And quite frankly, sometimes we had to have meetings with just like somebody mentioned to Mark about, is there a problem? Are they questioning if there was an issue? We actually had that as well. So we had to come up with a presentation to say there was an issue. And I have a real life example where on Friday, it was a major architectural firm here in the Valley, prominent firm. They weren't sure why there was an issue. And I gave them a presentation of why there's an issue, going anywhere from lack of opportunities from K-12 through some of the, I didn't get into the 10-point plan. I just told them that there were issues. On Friday, they said, thank you for coming. We're really not interested. That same Monday in that firm, I got a call from them that afternoon, because that Monday morning, one of the principals made a presentation to the staff. And in that presentation, it was discriminatory against Asians. And it was a rendering of a project, and all the models in the rendering were all women in bikinis. And this is the same company that thought there wasn't any problems.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that to say that what we just do is we're reaching out to as many companies as possible to spread the word from company to company to company.
So Gary, yeah, George.
No, again, I'm just wondering, this is a great discussion. And I'm just trying to get us, I'm wondering if are there any things we haven't done, or should we explore different strategies? I understand. Believe me, I've been here. I've been through this many times, so, and I understand that the difficulty of it. But at the same time, I'm also somebody who doesn't give up, and that gets back to what do we have? We had a prompt here, question about what do we stand to lose if we do nothing. Obviously, that is not the case. You are doing something. Is there any way of even enhancing that in some way, shape, or form? I don't know what that is, but is anyone exploring that? How do we get past where we're at today, including what you're experiencing as recently as this week?
Yeah, it's amazing. So there was a question, George, and it goes to something that Steve had mentioned about being Jackie Robinson. It says even women are still Jackie Robinson in many areas of commercial real estate. It is clearly a career area that is slow to respond to expand to diversity. And, it's they talk about the good old boy club. Commercial real estate brokerage is, that's a tough one. And so, Sheila, what has your experience been in trying to be, you've been very successful in being successful in this arena, which is very difficult. What would you think are some of the changes that still need to be made?
Well, I'm at Cushman and Wakefield and do commercial real estate brokerage. They have continued to attempt to hire women brokers. I think that it is a hard road because many people have a tough time going 100% commission. So that is a huge hurdle for anyone that goes into brokerage.
Yeah.
But when I have the opportunity to hire, I brought in a woman to work with me. And now, so that's my chance to do something. I looked at men and women, but I ended up bringing in a woman. And I can then now, as I start projects, go, okay, intentionally, I'm going to change my network of who I normally go to and maybe bring in different people to provide services on my project just after listening tonight. Because, as a broker, you're just trying to make a buck. You're just trying to close the deal. And so you go to the people that you've always gone to before. But if I know that I have another set of resources that we all want to make this project work well, I think that it's helpful if we intentionally try to do this and use a different team. And because we have input on our level as the broker. And that's why I'm bringing that up. We have at least the ability to come in and say, well, why don't we try this? Have you tried using this architectural firm or this project management group, or, trying to bring a different set of resources to the table? And I think it just will get visibility over time, and we'll try to highlight it with some PR, not the fact that it was a diversity team, but just try to highlight specific people on that team that have done just an amazing job, and you'll get more visibility. I think the difficulty we have is just, it is such a good old boy network, and I fight it every day as a woman. It's hard, but it takes time, and I'm respected, and I love what I do. But it just takes time to beat down the wall. So.
I mean, George, you've been successful. You've dealt with this, you said, your whole life. You've just ground it out.
Yeah.
And that's hard. You said something which I think is important. So you can make a lot of money in commercial brokerage. I mean, everybody realizes that. And sometimes you don't, and it's really tough.
Right.
But there's the prospect, and that is an opportunity to engage in an important part of community, which is real property. And without real property and without ownership of real property, you lose control. And that's critical. And you said something which I think is important, and that is you're 100% commission. You're coming from a underprivileged,
Right.
lower to middle income background. You don't have the ability to say, you know what, I'm going to give this a go and try and make it. You simply can't.
I can now, but
You can
there's
now.
been many years that I couldn't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, but you take the average person, and it's really tough for them to do it. I mean, we have Victor Fidelis, who's he's in real estate. He's come from South Phoenix. It's tough to make a living.
It is.
Hey, Mark, I'm going to jump in with a question from Ray.
Yep.
It says, Lorenzo touched a bit on the challenges for the younger folks coming from lesser represented backgrounds, getting a toehold into the development in AEC world. Oftentimes, it's your network and family connections. Curious if the other panelists could elaborate on their strategies for breaking in and finding mentors. I want to direct that towards Wanda and Lorenzo, if you guys can elaborate on that, or whoever wants to go ahead and chime in.
You know, I get to do a lot of mentoring for ULI young leaders, and Mark's had me mentor a bunch of his MRED students. And real estate is a relationship business, and you can't network enough, and you just kind of gotta I think you gotta keep working to build your relationships, get involved, and be vulnerable and transparent about what you're aspiring, to become and do. And what worked for me was not pretending I was somebody I wasn't, and telling people where I honestly came from, and was being humble about my desire to learn the business, and let them know, I'm figuring this out as I go. And I'll tell you, my personal experience, there's so many people that appreciate that sincerity and want to help. So I would recommend just get involved. And I was fortunate enough to go through a great cultural company, Kitchell, here in town, who's also a developer builder. And they had a philosophy of pull up your replacement behind you. And so that was instilled in me, and I try to do that with others. You talked about Victor, and I'm having a great experience working with a group of young, ambitious individuals from South Central Phoenix as they contemplate the light rail expansion into South Phoenix. And I see Victor's question here, are there examples of other communities where they've cultivated the developers from those communities? And I think it's been wonderful to see their passion, their sensitivity, their heart and spirit for what they want to do to their community. And we got to find ways to cultivate developers in those communities, because we all know who've been in this business, what a beatdown, how tough this industry can be, how scary, how you're constantly pushing rope. And you need people who have the love and commitment for those communities to push through all that, So that would be my recommendation. And if you can lend a hand and help mentor those individuals, I know that's a personal mission for myself. I think I'd encourage others to do the same.
Yeah, and I would only add,
Wanda?
you gotta be cheeky. I talked on the phone today, and they were like, well, what kind of consultant fee do you want? I said, I want 20% of the bill. That's what I want. You gotta be cheeky.
Wanda, you're on mute.
What do I have to lose? So that's my strategy right now, is just throw it out there. What do I have to lose? Be cheeky.
So
I was going to say, who in the field do you see advancing these issues? Anyone in terms of the metropolitan Phoenix area?
So George, we had Paula mention Incremental Development Alliance. And I'm not familiar with them, but I'm assuming that is an organization that is maybe doing exactly that. So, maybe Paula, you can address your comment.
Yeah, so there's a group called the IncDev Alliance. There's a Facebook group, which is We Do Incremental Development, and it is nationwide. They just did a training in Tucson, not that it matters in a time of COVID and remote webinars. But their whole focus is getting people who are new to development into the missing middle is what they're talking about. So like duplexes, transforming like a single family home into like a quad or something like that, like adding a unit into your backyard. So they're really focused on helping people like get into development, build up their communities, figure out what it is that their communities need. I'm in the Facebook group. I have no other allegiance or alliance to them. I'm a fan of what they do. But it might be worth taking a look. Like I've personally been interested in it, and that's why I know about them.
Yeah, thank you. George, what groups do you know? Anybody in your travels and your here, other parts of the country?
I have made most of my connections in the field have been individuals who were very unique in their ability to speak to power in their communities. It hasn't necessarily been organizations. And obviously I've had to play that role in Detroit, both in the public and private sector. But I asked that because we did find that in our area, in Detroit, we did have individuals that we identified that were people that were part of that were more enlightened in regards to what was going on and were not running from it. And so if we had to get down to an individual level, and that included some people who were the beneficiaries of the Good Old Boy Network, who said we had to do something. And so from that standpoint, that is how I went about this. And fortunately, I had some of them sit on my boards. I've had a lot of support from them, and so have a lot of other African American as well as Latinos in where we have a large population in the city of Detroit who are sensitive to that issue. And so the organizations, I've just been, just as I've heard here, kind of hard pressed in regards to that, other than, their meetings. You have a group that now of developers in Detroit that for the first time, we actually have a developer roundtable that is inclusive. That doesn't mean that we are rising in terms of the economics we would like to, but at least now we're at a point that they understand that in the city, particularly with its demographic makeup, we have to come together and try to work together on this. So we're starting to see this with this developer roundtable, somewhat addressing our issues, not to the extent that we would like to, but it's either that, but at least we are at the table and playing a role in terms of that organization. But more importantly, it's just been individuals in corporate America and in the business world in general, entrepreneurs that we have latched on to, who have basically said, I will work with you and do something about this, and I will go to the table with you when you want to have that meeting with organizations that are not cooperating as of yet, or so that's basically what we have done.
Mark, this is Malik. I think one of the groups that have been helpful in advancing this issue are some of the local academic institutions in the state, in Metro Detroit as well. I graduated from the University of Michigan, and I spent maybe 3 or 4 years on their alumni board of governors. And it was because of some of the early policies that groups like that put in place, along with support from the university system. that they were very intentional, coming from the late 60s through the 80s and 90s, with being intentional about having cohorts of students come through that were of color. And I mean, everything from, going to the schools, middle schools, working with the principals, trying to identify talent early, those kinds of things, having immersion programs in the summertime and spring break and those kinds of things. So they also have a vested interest in making sure that their students matriculate up and through into the professional ranks, and to the extent that they can be helpful in helping to reinforce things that, as individuals, as George mentioned, are trying to push forward. They generally have been very open to being a part of those conversations. So I do want to lift up the academic institutions, including ASU too, for being courageous and trying to have sessions like this.
One of the things that we also have done is ask what corporation, identify the corporations and where are they recruiting. We'll find out if they're recruiting historically minority institutions, and who are they recruiting, even in all of this. So we really started focusing on and bringing that to the table, of the major companies, both in terms of purchasing and buying goods, but also in regards to their professional college level manpower as well. Because we now ask them and tell them, who are you recruiting? Where are you going? And so both the banks, big three, everybody right now knows that that's one of our targets. And it's been very successful in that regard. Because now they're pretty on Front Street in regards to that, because that's the pipeline. And if your pipeline, particularly in the city, there's 80% minorities, actually 85%, then we're gonna call you out. And unfortunately, that's what you have to do sometimes. So kind of interesting how that came about. But it was also interesting that we got people that were in within the power structure that we would consider could have stayed over there in their cocoon, but they came out and supported us in some of these things, because it just makes too much sense. And you can't do that in a city, particularly with our ethnic makeup, that we have to address this issue. So more and more of the companies are now being much more sensitive than before, simply because we speak up in Detroit. They know they're going to have to deal with some folks in Detroit. And so all I'm saying is I'll close this on something early in my career. And I had a mentor. I was 2 years into my career out of college at a firm called Detroit Edison, now called DTE Energy. And we were in the midst of that first class action lawsuit. And they went to the United States Supreme Court. It's called Stamps versus Edison. Stamps was a janitor, okay? And this case went to the U.S. Supreme Court and we won. But I remember my mentor, I went to talk to him, and he says, I said, well, obviously this is risky, what we're doing. And because I was one of the first ones who had a college, considered a professional management person, to join this effort. And I said, I'm really taking a risk doing this. And, so I guess I got it. He said, so you had some fear, right? I said, well, yeah, I got a little fear. That's true. He said, well, why are you going to be afraid that they're going to do something they're already doing? That comment changed my life. I mean, that changed my whole life. That comment, from having a good mentor who told me that. And, because I said, you know what? He's right. He said, so you're afraid they're going to do something they're already doing to you. And that was very liberating in ways that I think a lot of people along the way in my career have found out. So, but it's something to really take a hold of, because it really, I think that the key thing though is, after a while, you're not going to gain if you're afraid. And unfortunately, that's so much a part of what we face, is being strong enough and not being afraid to do something that's already happening to us in regards to fighting for, just basically having equality in regards to, and fairness in the process of being hired and being promoted.
Yeah, thank you.
Mark, can I add that, I'm encouraged seeing that the Urban Land Institute has taken such a formal and public position on diversity, equity, inclusion since the George Floyd incident, and even here in Phoenix, assembling a committee, a group, and reaching out across to Local First, reaching out to NOMA, other organizations to create alignment. And I'm encouraged because we know Urban Land Institute is really a straight shot conduit to the who's who of development globally. So I'm hopeful that they'll stick with that and affect positive change in the development industry, especially because it has a multidiscipline reach across all the disciplines.
Yeah, I would hope that all of the professional organizations recognize the benefit of taking on this issue head on. Into that end, and I know we're going to run out of time here quickly. Not that we have to stop right at 8, but in Shannon, I'm gonna throw this at you, because we're talking about opportunities in a place, and the place where we all are at the moment is Metro Phoenix. And how does GPEC see this? I mean, are there requests from companies that are looking to relocate here, that are asking about the diversity of the community, that are interested in ensuring that there are a variety of backgrounds and ethnicities and genders that they can choose from as an employment pool?
Yeah, there are a few points on there. One is we are seeing an increase. It's small. The baseline is very low, but an increase in companies that are now slowly asking about what the diversity, equity, inclusion practices are in this region. They are predominantly from the metro areas, but someone said earlier this evening that it's a business decision. And at the end of the day, if it impacts your wallet, people will start to pay attention. So hopefully that will actually gain traction. And there are plenty of examples in other markets like Salesforce in Indianapolis, right? With the LGBTQ issue. So it's about looking at all the protected classes, making sure that we're at the forefront of that. And in discussions we have with our board often is, as a newer market, how can we leapfrog, right, the struggles and challenges that other markets have had? I do think that one thing this region, and I've only lived here for 2 years, I think that although we are the fastest growing county in the country, we don't necessarily have the population density that other markets have. So I think that it's possible, for example, and I shared this with Kimber before, where when I first moved here, I had many friends ask me, is Phoenix or Arizona as racist as it seems, right? Because Arpaio, SB 1070, that's what they see. And my response was, I live in Scottsdale. I work in downtown Phoenix. I'm married to a straight white man. I have no idea if it's racist, right? Because I'm actually able to live in my little bubbles, and I'm not forced to interact with people of color outside of service jobs as I had been in the 8 other cities that I've lived in, which include New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and so on. So I'm going off on a bit of a tangent there, but to answer your question, yes, companies are slowly now asking about this. I think the larger trend is maybe 15, 20 years ago, what we saw was where the CEO of a company would say, I want to move to Barrington, Illinois, or I want to move to Paradise Valley, Arizona. And the company has to follow. Now the trend is almost a reverse, whereas a workforce who's very active on Twitter and Instagram, now, especially from California, they're saying we don't want to commute 1.5 to 2 hours one way to work. And this is pre-COVID. but we don't want to pay $4,000 a month to rent a studio. And so as you're looking at other markets, we're competing with Salt Lake City, Austin, Denver, right? Others, as the flow from California exits, but those other markets are more diverse. And millennials and Gen Z care about these trends. So how we respond as a market is pretty important. The last point I did want to share was, sorry, it's a little bit late in the evening for me. Is that the other factor that the younger workforce cares about is public education, right? Because they have school-age children. And so maybe it's not directly a DEI issue per se, but obviously it's very embedded in that topic. And as everyone here knows, we're not performing there very well. And so I think both directly and indirectly, these issues are bubbling up. And as I share with my team, these issues used to be slide 18 or 19 when we're pitching the region, and now they're slides 2 and 3.
Yeah. So I'm going to make one snarky comment.
Please
which
do.
is, you mean we're not all going to die if 208 passes?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, don't even get me started. Well, and just for the record, GPEC is nonpartisan.
Yeah, I know.
It is important to note that our education challenges is a DEI. It is a DEI issue.
Absolutely.
The changing demographics in Arizona, right? And it is
Yes.
it's unconscionable that the powers that be don't want to educate Arizona youth. They don't want to pay for it. And so here we are.
So the other thing, though, is you were talking about the fact this is becoming increasingly important to companies making decisions about where to locate. And, what can we do? So we've had, prior to your comments, we were having discussions about being purposeful. Should GPEC be purposeful? Should we be purposeful about this? Because it starts at the top. It starts with a policy. It starts with a definitive statement. Is there a likelihood that's going to happen? And what does the GPEC board look like?
No, absolutely. And it's almost as if you overheard Kimber and my conversation about a week or so ago, where GPEC is predominantly white. Our board is 84 people. It is predominantly older white men. Our staff is 30 people. It does not, the racial and ethnic makeup does not reflect the market. And so I think before we make any big moves, for me, in my opinion, it's important that as an organization, we first accept how white we are, right? Because otherwise, I'm afraid that any moves we make will be either trendy or reactionary, right? Or like a vanity measure. So actually, I just drafted the organization's first self-assessment report, and it's in draft form, and I need to send it to you, Kimber. And it's not meant to be prescriptive, but it's to look at, if our leadership team, for example, if we're 80% white, but the market's only 40% white, we need to be aware of that first. And so that's a body of work where I'm embarrassed to admit that in our 31 history, we have never actively looked at. And in our 31 history, we have never actively reached out to communities of color for the purposes of DEI. That's the first thing. The second thing is when we create a Venn diagram of all the issues that our staff cares about, and a Venn diagram of, what is GPEC uniquely positioned to do, right? The overlap, one thing when we're working, we partner with the state of Black Arizona. And the state of Black Arizona, they're working on producing a report on, as the title says, like the state of the Black economy in the state. And as an economic development house where we have our own data scientists, for example, we are supporting them with a data and analysis perspective. So I'm sharing these two bodies of work. Oh, and the third body of work, which has been on our plate even before, before George Floyd was murdered, before any of this, is an equity and inclusion dashboard. It's been in sort of purgatory for a while because we weren't sure how actionable it was going to be or how unique it was going to be. But to my long-winded way of answering your question, Mark, is we want to make sure that we get these small bodies of work executed well in a tangible way before we start approaching larger issues. An example of a larger issue is in Greater Phoenix. One of our flagship recruitment events is Phoenix Open. That's golf. And as long as we keep relying on golf as a primary driver of site selection, we're going to keep inviting white men to our region. So how do we, to your point, deliberately diversify our activities in a way that's meaningful and actually represents the community that we're trying to serve?
Yeah, interesting. I'm glad to hear you're working on that. And I'm sure that some of the
a little late, but better late than never.
Yeah, but I'm sure there's people on this call that would be willing to provide input as well and help.
Love that.
Yeah, I'm encouraged to see that you're looking at that for GPEC, because along with that, I'm sure you know, GPEC was just recently awarded, top economic development council in the U.S., which then speaks to what's the criteria for that. So, so we're considered tops in the nation, yet, we have these issues. So kudos to you. I know Chris Camacho has done a great job of maneuvering through from an economic standpoint, but the economic development standpoint. But it's interesting to see that again, there's never been this quote unquote self-study that has occurred, and so it's wonderful that better now than later, right? So that's encouraging.
Yeah, well, we're still a young metropolitan area, right? So let's take it as part of our growing.
Exactly. Yeah.
In the fact that GPAC has a chief operating officer that is a woman and an Asian woman, that is also beginning to help these kinds of things along.
Yeah.
George, we're about 5 minutes past what was supposed to be our end time.
Yeah.
What would you like to do here? Do you think we're...
Well, we went through most of our questions. I was going to turn it over to Dominique because of time, being sensitive to people's schedules.
Yes.
Yeah, so all of the questions that we had in the chat, I believe, were addressed. If there are any more, feel free unmute your mic to jump in if you do have any questions. But with respect to time, if anybody needs to jump on, go ahead and do so, or jump off, go ahead and do so. I just want to thank you guys all for participating in this discussion, and all of the participants who've been extremely generous with their time and helping us shape this discussion. And I'll be sending out some recap resources to all of our attendees. I'll be sure to make sure that you guys get that within the next couple of days. But thank you.
Yeah, and I would say, and Kimber, jump in here, that we are intending for this to be the foundation of a dialogue that continues over the course of the next 9 or 10 months. It is not intended to be a singular conversation. We want to make sure that we continue to explore the entire issue of inclusion and social and environmental equity and all of the things that relate to this topic, because they're important to us.
Yeah, so what we hope to do is, bring together organizations and entities such as Design Empowerment in South Phoenix that Wanda just mentioned, and she mentors and works with that group of individuals to learn from them about what they're doing. Victor and the group that he's leading, learn from them about the work that they're doing, and bring them together with some very big flagship organizations such as Kitchell. How is Kitchell working they have an entire division that is focused on tribal relations, and they've been doing that since the 90s. So how can we continue to advance the conversation, inviting different types of perspectives around the table to learn and expand on these ideas? Mark, in terms of us being a young metropolitan area, we've got about 10 more minutes to claim that before we are officially middle-aged and no longer off the hook. So really important conversations and some wonderful people to learn from. Somebody mentioned the missing middle, incremental development. There are some people doing some wonderful work, and we need to give them the platform to be able to share these ideas, learn from each other, and really bring people to the discussion who can implement a lot of these changes. So thank you all so much for being here. The purpose of Forum is to have these types of community conversations. I'd like to thank our partners, NOMA and MRED. And once again, as Dominique said, a big shout out, thank you to our panelists for their time and expertise and decades that you bring of learning to teach us here tonight. So thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, and I'd like to add one last thank you to Dominique for doing such an excellent job in pulling these pieces together.
Yeah.
Thanks. You'll
Yeah,
hear.
I know it was like herding cats for a minute there, Dominique. So thank you.
Yeah.
Great job.
He's a cat herder for sure, official cat herder. But you'll hear more about the other programs coming up. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
You guys
Bye.
have
Have a good evening.
Bye.